Hey, 158. Lance is putting in, he's got his earphones in.
I can hear
All
perfectly.
right, shall we start by talking about cops? Because today is what, day 2 or 3 of protests and rioting
Did you
in
just stop? Did you start the camera?
it's going. It's going.
We're so professional. Sorry, audience.
It's all right. Sorry, I'm apologizing on the audience's behalf. We're saying it's okay. Anyway, protests in probably, I don't know, close to 100 American cities, including rioting, including all sorts of stuff. So we should talk about all that.
Well,
Lance?
you start. You
Okay,
start.
so a guy named George Floyd, I don't know exactly when this happened, probably about a week ago, is in I guess a market, a supermarket, and is suspected of passing a fake $20 bill. The cops come, 4 officers. Um, One guy subdues him. He's on the ground. He's face down on the ground. He's not struggling. This cop kneels on his neck, has half of his body weight on the guy's neck via the cop's knee for 8 minutes, including close to 3 minutes after the guy died. The guy's saying he can't breathe, he can't breathe. He's calling for his mom, and after about 5 minutes, he dies, but the cop stays kneeling on his neck for a total of 8 minutes, 3 minutes after he died. Um, this was all caught on video because everybody has cell phone cameras now. The crowd was yelling for the cop to get off of him. Um, so there was widespread. There's still widespread anger, and after a couple days, the cop was indicted for, among other things, third-degree murder. Um, None of the other 3 cops who stood by have yet been indicted. They've all been, I think they've all been fired, or just the one cop. I think all the cops have been fired, um, but only one has been indicted. Um, and people are pissed about that. And there's been rioting for the past, I don't know, 72 hours across America, um, with accusations and counter accusations. Trump says he's going to proclaim Antifa, which stands for anti-fascists, which is a loose organization to the extent that it's organized at all of super leftist activists and agitators. People are claiming that you've got the peaceful protesters, then you've got the looters and the vandals, and people are claiming that some of the people in it are, I'd say that, I mean, you can't, it's tough to say what the percent breakdown, nobody will ever know for sure, but I would guess that most of the people who are out doing stuff are either sincere protesters or people like I would have been if I were in my protesting years, guys who have a semi-sincere interest in what's going on, but are also motivated to go out and see if I can meet like a pretty other protester. Probably most people are like that. People who want to protest honestly, maybe, and also just see what the whole thing is about. And then you have bad actors, vandals, rioters, Antifa lunatics, possibly agents provocateurs, white supremacists and right wingers who are in there to stir up more trouble. It's a whole mix, and Then you have, since everything's on videotape, and since these protests and riots are going on across the country with tens of thousands of people, and probably thousands of cops, some cops are going to do stupid shit on get caught on camera being too aggressive. Though you have cops on the other side, like cops who put down their shields and then march with the protesters. It's a whole mix. It's a bunch of shit going on. Everything's happening pretty fast. Lance.
All right. Well, I like it when I can give people new information on this show. And I do not have new information, but I have my own theory. And I haven't heard this theory anywhere else. So here's my theory. We know two very odd things about this murder. The first is that the cop and the victim worked together in a bar as security, and that they worked. They may not have worked at the same days, but they worked, during the same period of months or weeks. So they almost certainly know each other. The second part of my personal theory is that it was obvious to everybody, including the cops, that they were roughing him up. They were not. They were clearly brutalizing him. Whether they intended to actually murder him, only God knows. But the only two things we know for sure is that the cop and the victim worked together, and that the cop deliberately did, vastly more than was required, because the victim was compliant. I mean, he was lying on the ground, handcuffed. He couldn't do anything. So that indicates to me that this was a murder, and it wasn't just an example of police brutality, like an arrest where something goes wrong. Either the perpetrator has a heart attack, or the cop is too rough with him, and either way the perpetrator dies. I don't think that's what happened. I think that they planned this. I think that the cop had something going on with the victim, and felt that he had a better chance of killing the guy during an arrest and getting away with it than his other alternative, whatever that might have been. So that's my theory, I can't prove that what the motives were, but I can't deny those two facts, that the cop knew he was going too far, and that they worked together before. So there's things we don't know.
Okay.
Do you have a point before I move on? Go ahead.
Yeah, that it depends on how big the bar is. And a lot of other, I mean, if they had some relationship, that may come out. If it was, the cop had like 14 excessive force complaints filed on him over, I want to say 17 years, but that's not right. I don't know. Anyway, more than a dozen complaints.
And that's not in dispute.
Okay, so
that he was a brutal cop that should have been fired long ago is not in dispute.
Yeah. So we don't know if they had a previous thing. And, did they both work the same position as security in a bar? Because a bar can have bouncers and security guards, and, there's not that in some bars, there's not that much overlap between, somebody walking the parking lot and somebody checking IDs at the door, for instance. So anyway, we may find out more. If it were a straight up murder and not just a cop being brutal, you'd think the other three cops would be like, what's the deal here? Or this looks murdery to us.
Well, one of the things that Dan Bongino mentioned, and he's a conservative radio host, is that because he's done wrestling and martial arts, he watched the way the cop was sitting on his neck, and the the leg that was not on his neck, the free leg, was moving around. So he wasn't using the free leg to support himself. So what
Okay.
that means is all of the cop's weight was on the leg that was on his neck.
Okay.
And it's possible that some of these cops didn't notice. They may have thought that he had distributed his weight in a way that he was just holding him there with his leg. But if you look at the tape, you can see that now his whole weight is on it. So in other words, in 8 minutes, a lot of things can happen in 8 minutes. I'm just speculating now. I have no idea. But I've heard that one of the other cops was actually on him, that you can't see him on the film. You can see him from another film. But I'm saying a couple of the other cops may not have noticed, or maybe they were in on it. I have no idea. So there's no point arguing with me. It's just
Yeah. Okay.
there's a lot more that we have to find out. Now, as far as the riots that have now occurred, I blame several factors. The first is that it took the DA in Minneapolis said he didn't see a case, and several days had to pass before they would arrest this guy. And my feeling is that you might have had a chance of holding off some of this if the cops had all been arrested immediately. But the tension was mounting as the population of Minneapolis just watched, and it looked like the city was just going to let them get away with it. The second point I want to make is that there's certainly an argument can be made for people to go out and protest a police killing. But another thing that's going on is that at least half of these people that are marching are unemployed. And there's no doubt that the unemployment rate in the country, in some areas, in the blue collar areas, in some cities, in some cases, it's 30%. And among the crowds I was looking at, that is young, they don't look terribly skillful people, it might be 50% of those people have no jobs, maybe 80%, who knows? So the fact that these people have no jobs, they're pissed off, they've been brought up to believe that they're being hunted by the police, which I think is a perception that is exaggerated. The fact that one other thing. Now, I may as well tell you guys that a few weeks ago on May Day, May the 1st, I went on a protest. I did a peaceful protest in front of LA City Hall. And what I was protesting was the lockdown. Because I didn't think, I was saying that I didn't think that the population of California should be locked down. I think that, briefly, I think the elderly people need to be quarantined and taken very close care of, very careful. They should be locked down. But I think the young people and the very young people should be carrying on with their activities to build up herd immunity. Anyway, that's beside the point. While I was at the rally, we had agents provocateurs. While I was at this rally, out of nowhere, about 100 communists showed up, and they clearly wanted to fight. And what was weird about it was that we didn't even know how they found out we were going to be there. We didn't send out any notifications to communists, but they did everything they could to start violence with us, and our side would have given it to them, except that the police very cleverly formed a barrier between the two groups with their own bodies. The police formed a line, and eventually the communists and anarchists were persuaded to leave. So I am virtually certain that these protests are being turned into violent things by provocateurs. I know because I've seen it with my own eyes.
Okay.
All right, so the last thing I'm going to say, and I'll wrap it up, is that if any good comes of this, it's that Trump is designating Antifa a terrorist organization. It should have been done a long time ago. But if we can start taking those bastards and putting them in jail, I mean, I can't believe we couldn't up till now. But now he's enabling the forces of the U.S. government to dismantle Antifa and destroy it. And believe me, once that happens, there'll be a lot less violence in these protests. There'll be protests, but it won't get like this.
All right. So we have a lot more points of agreement this week so far than usual. I agree with you that that the rest of everything that's going on, including massive unemployment, adds to everybody's frustration. With regard to Antifa, and I've read a few tweets about everything, and one trouble with designating them an organization is, I don't know, when I worked in bars, there were good crowds and there were bad crowds. And for some reason, reggae fans were a bad crowd. Punk fans, the people who would stage dive and mosh and smash into each other violently on the dance floor, they were a good crowd, because when they weren't smashing into each other, they would follow reasonable rules. Reggae people wore little buttons that said "question authority," and they'd just be dicks just to be dicks. And the deal with Antifa is kind of like a reggae crowd. They're opposed to organization. They're not really an organization. They're a bunch of hardcore leftists, and with I'm sure a large percentage of anarchists. And that means that given that constituency, they're not organized. They're a bunch of a-holes who go out and there are probably, I mean, it's probably a mix of straight up a-holes who like getting in tussles and earnest lunatics who want to burn everything down and start over, and everybody in between. People who are legitimately pissed at the corporatist state and the how democracy has been co-opted by capitalism and all that stuff. But it's like it's a mix of people who want to stir up shit. So that's objection number one. That how do you declare an organization a terrorist organization when it's not really an organization?
Okay, let me respond to that, because otherwise we'll talk past each other.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Rick, but I don't think you know anything about Antifa.
That's possible.
I've read a lot about it. I think the reason I read a lot about it was because they were acting up a few years ago, and I sort of made it a little hobby of mine. But what I remember is that they're actually very well organized. Um, what they want, their objective is to create chaos. They believe that the more violence, the more chaotic the society is, the more likely we'll end up with a left-wing leader. So they undoubtedly think that if every city in America was in flames, we wouldn't elect Donald Trump again. That would prove him to be a failure. But I've read a lot about how they organize their riots. First of all, they have meetings beforehand. They Their clothing is very carefully chosen so that they cover their face. They have ways of identifying each other. They they have ways of infiltrating any kind of protest. Doesn't matter what the protest is about. And the goal is to turn the protest violent. They have they have weapons training. They have weapons that they can use that are less lethal than guns. Like they don't bring guns, but they have kind of street fighting weapons that they train with. They disperse into crowds in an organized way when they're infiltrating, and they have procedures like they're not allowed to look at each other or talk to each other so that people don't see that they're working together. They're expert at working in out of control crowds. Because one of the things I found in my protest was it was very difficult for people to know what was happening. There were hundreds of people everywhere and cops everywhere, and it took a while for the beast of the crowd to know what was going on. It would be very useful to know how to organize a protest. Wait,
Can I say something just real quick? That
Okay.
suggests that somebody should develop protest and riot apps that tell you what's going on.
Yeah, well, but I mean, there are things you can do. If I'd have understood it, I could have just used a cell phone or wore a certain kind of badge or just discussing just knowing what police tactics are during a protest. Like I learned what police do during a protest. It's not what I expected. And if you go to enough of these, you see the patterns. And that's what they do. They're professional rioters. Another thing they do is when they're not infiltrating, when they're doing their own Antifa protest, they organize themselves into different columns so that the younger ones, for example, the ones that are less likely to get a long jail term, will be in the front. The ones in the back will have different kinds of weapons than the ones in the front. They know how to target one person and just surround him, make sure there's no cameras, and just fuck the guy up. So they're a very, very dangerous, very organized group. And for the president to try to shut them down is a really great step in the direction of order. So in other words, we had a bad couple of days of rioting, but I think we're going to see the turning. We're going to be turning a corner now with this because people know that
I
they can't
agree. I
fool
think people are
around
going to get
anymore.
sick of it.
Yeah.
So what you're saying doesn't sound completely implausible to me. So if you want to read about this, do you have a decent source?
I know. I mean, it's been a long time since I was reading up about it, but there are hundreds of articles, people that are former Antifa that say what it was like, the meetings, the planning. There are articles that come out every time there's a riot. There's things that come out about them that you can't be sure, but if you read a dozen articles and you go to a dozen protests, you'll get a fairly good idea that this is a real thing. I mean, you'll be able to figure out what's true and what isn't. I
Okay.
can tell you that the protest I was on, they were organized. They weren't Antifa. They were communists and anarchists, but they knew what they were doing. They knew way better. They were professionals. They knew what they were doing, and
So
they wanted to cause violent. They wanted violent rioting in the city of LA. It served their purpose.
okay. So I've got one more objection to your argument, but I want to throw in something that I've seen a lot on Twitter, and a lot of people saying, no, that's bullshit on Twitter, and that is the Russians. Now, you both of us, with vastly different points of view, agree that Russia loves to fuck things up here in the U.S. And so I've read a bunch of tweets saying that Russia has been stirring the embers of the protests, and then other people on Twitter saying bullshit, and other people saying, fucking how are they doing that? And I kind of buy that, Russia likes to add to our discontent, but that a lot of the current discontent may have, been further amplified, but in terms of doing actual shit with the protests and, having people go into, I don't think the Russians have significantly added to the current situation in current time. That's thing one. But thing two is,
well, wait,
if you want.
Otherwise, we'll be talking past each other.
Sure.
All right. So, one of the things I've tried to do in this show over the past 2.5 years is say that the Russians don't have to physically do anything anymore. They took over our education system. And if you ask, they've taken over the leftists in the U.S., whether they know it or not, are the grandchildren of communist infiltrators. There are people, they have total control over the universities, total control over the mainstream media. I believe they control the Democrat Party, and they're not getting orders from Moscow. There's no guy with a Russian accent that has to call them and say, hey, remember to make sure everyone thinks America's racist. And next time an unarmed black gets killed, make sure you show that 24/7 every day until there's a riot. And when there is a riot, make sure that you depict the rioters as good, fine people, and make sure that it spreads. And because they don't have to do that. The American people have spent 60 years being brainwashed by leftists into believing that the country is racist, and that all it would take is one match to go off to create a race war. I mean, if you look at Facebook and Twitter, and you talk to people, 80% of the young people assumed we'd be in a civil war at some point in their life. And 80% of the blacks believe that, this is cops are trying to kill them, and that it's self-defense.
Can I agree with you for half a second before I forget, because then I'm going to run. That every time it seems like we're fucked, and this is what's going on in this country right now, makes it seem like we're fucked, but we're never as fucked as we think we are. It feels like '92 in LA, with the Rodney King riots. And it also feels, you and I are old enough to remember the 60s, being little kids in the 60s, with the rioting over the Vietnam War. And it felt like things were fucked then. And I'm sure it felt like things were fucked as we entered into World War II. But in retrospect, given our resources, our technological might, the outcome of World War II, while it took a while to happen, wasn't, once we entered the war, the outcome was no longer in question. It just took a while. So yeah, I'd say, and I'd agree with you that in general, we're not as fucked as watching the news would make you think we are.
Well, I actually do think the country's in trouble. I do. I'm not able to predict. If I can tell you this much, in my opinion, if the Democrats take over the government through the presidency and the House and the Congress and the Senate, I don't think the country will survive that. I think what will end up happening is the country will become a third-rate power. We'll begin our decline, and we'll end up like a country like the United Kingdom that was wildly powerful 80 years ago and now is just kind of a shell of its former self. And I do think that's very possible if the Democrats win. But yeah. Well, yeah. Oh, okay. The director said that since Rick is part of the resistance to Trump, if the Democrats win, would I be part of a resistance movement against the Democrats? And I, I would. That does bring me to certain issues I wanted to bring up with Rick, but uh,
We got to
about
finish
his.
up Antifa before we get to
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Okay. So you had one last point, and I interrupted you. And director, we'll get to your point. But Rick, I don't know if you remember, but I interjected. You had one last thing you
Well, no,
wanted to
I
say.
want to talk to you about your point that we're fucked. And I just read an essay earlier this week that agrees that we're fucked um, in a serious way, but because we haven't spent enough on infrastructure and social structures over the past 30, 40, 50 years, that what we do, that we don't want to pay taxes, and compared to countries that, like little boutique countries like Finland and Norway and Denmark, the Scandinavian and Baltic countries with 5 to 10 million people, where people you know are willing to pay 50% in taxes. They have all these support systems that we don't have, and that it may be too late to get them because we're still unwilling to pay taxes, and so everybody's fucking deeply in debt for everything, and that may be what fucks us. But we don't have to argue about that because we
Well,
got to finish up.
I could respond to that. Let me respond. Otherwise, we're talking past each other.
Okay. Well, let
I
me. Okay. Okay.
okay. I don't believe that one bit. Taxes for our infrastructure are irrelevant. And if you look at this riot this week, that this is a prime example. Inglewood, I mean Compton, parts of LA, never recovered from the riots. I mean, the worst thing that ever happened to places like Detroit and parts of Los Angeles and other places is you have a riot where the people destroy their neighborhood and then all the businesses leave. Nobody wants to open a store that they know is going to get burned down in a year. And so if you want to destroy a city, all you have to do is have the riots that we have. There's every study ever done says that what throws a city into decline is a riot where things start getting burned down. And so that doesn't get solved by more taxes. It's just if the people that live in an area are assholes and they decide that the smartest thing to do is to burn down and loot their own part of town, well, then they're going to end up living in poverty. And their kids are going to grow up saying, why are we living in poverty? And then they may riot again. But it's the attitude of the people, not how much taxes they pay. There's no social programs that are going to help assholes. If you've got a generation of young people that are so fucking stupid that when they see a cop killing one of their race, they think they have to burn down their own city. Well, there's no money there's no program that's going to change somebody that's that stupid. They're just idiots.
Well, yeah, and
by
so,
the way, countries like Finland and Luxembourg and Denmark, they don't have huge numbers of people that are that stupid that will burn down parts of Copenhagen. Because
well, as I said earlier, like that, there are most of the people at the protests aren't idiots, and it's a small percentage of the of bad actors who are opportunistic. But
I don't know.
And I haven't. Wait, hold on. Let me say a couple things. I haven't read the same studies you have, but cities are already kind of fucked. Retail is fucked because of the internet. And Carol and I will walk to a restaurant to pick up dinner, and we'll pass by the couple restaurants in a couple block radius of our place went out of business on February 1st. And Carol and I are like, though they are so lucky to have failed before COVID caused them to fail. But because if they hadn't gone out of business in February, COVID would have killed them dead. And so you got riots, you got COVID, and you have the internet, and retail is so fucked. All right, now let me do a couple more. The second point about Antifa is people are saying on Twitter and in my mind, if you're going to call Antifa a terrorist organization, it would be nice to balance that by looking at some right-wing organizations. Like, I don't know what the official status of the Klan is, or what other right-wing organizations.
The Klan is a terrorist organization.
Okay.
There's no one in the Trump administration is saying, "Wow, the Klan, they're just wonderful people." Nobody's saying,
like Cliven Bundy when he took over that wildlife thing. This was what, 6 years ago? More?
I don't know what you're talking about.
A bunch of right-wingers took over a wilderness park, a state or a federal park, and held it for weeks. And in the end, at gunpoint, at semi-automatic weapon point, and in the end really didn't suffer much in the way of jail time or anything. And everybody was going crazy saying this is a terrorist organization. And certainly there have to be some right-wing organizations that are as unsavory as Trump considers Antifa. That's thing one. Thing two
let me respond.
Okay.
Hold your thing too. Okay. So the reason that we can't do it reciprocal is because the left-wingers create these situations where there's this basically it's a left-wing revolution that we're facing right now. And just to sort of deflect attention, they say, aha, but what about the right-wingers? And so we all have to say, yeah, what about all those white supremacists? And it turns out in the Klan, the KKK has something like less than maybe a couple thousand members in the whole of the United States. And we're supposed to constantly juxtapose any kind of rightist or strange militia with the thousands and thousands and thousands of demonstrators all over America burning it down. And to me, it's just left-wing propaganda. You just don't want to own what your side is doing, Rick.
Well, we've had an example of, and I don't know how organized they are or whatever, but we've had an example of right-wing guys, sometimes with semi-automatic rifles, taking over state houses and shutting down, like the Michigan State House,
I'm really
and being
glad
treated
they did
with
that. I'm really glad they did that,
and being treated
And
with
really, yeah,
deference rather
yeah,
than.
and that's because they were patriotic Americans, and they were taking over a state house that had imposed a dictatorship on them. The Michigan is now a dictatorship that is as severe as North Korea. You can't.
Bullshit. No, come on, that's ridiculous.
It's not bullshit. It's not bullshit. Those people are not allowed to go to a store, leave their house without a mask. Uh, every single store has these strange regulations. They're not allowed to go to school. They're not allowed. They have the most strict COVID enforcement in the United States,
How does it
and
compare
there are no
to how does it
churches.
compare to LA?
It's 10 times worse. They are the way we were at the height of the absolute lockdown. They're the way it was when they finally stormed the state house. They were heroes. They were trying to save themselves from a fucking dictatorship. I'm glad they did it. I wish every American had a rifle and would storm the state house. That's why I went and protested in front of LA City Hall, to show those fucking Democrats that they can't tell me whether I can go outside, whether I can send my kid to school. How dare those goddamn Democrats tell me that whether or not I can go to a church, whether or not I can go to the beach. Over
I've
what?
been going out a lot now.
Yeah, you've been going out a lot. Well, great, Rick. I'm glad you got the permission to go out from your leaders. But I didn't ask for the Democrats to tell me whether I can go out or not. They've cooked up this whole COVID bullshit, and now I have to lock down my whole life. Thank God we can go to the state house with guns and tell those bastards that we're not going to take it.
Does that include do you find it dictatorial that like a store won't let you in unless you're wearing a mask?
It is the store's decision how they
Okay.
want to run their business. But the government should not be forcing the store to behave like idiots.
All right. So I mean, I could argue with you about all this shit about like guys with fucking. I mean, one guy had a bazooka, shit like that. And how fucking goofy that shit is. But like, I went to the dentist on Friday for a tooth clean, and which is, I don't know, is that crazy during the middle of all this? But they took my temperature. Everybody was masked. My hygienist, she's added a face shield. They used to ultrasound my teeth. She said they can't do that anymore because it aerosolizes the gunk from your mouth. They made me gargle for a minute with hydrogen peroxide before she even started. There were all these things in place to do that. And then I went to Michael's twice because in my fucking sad quarantine, I like doing crafty shit. I've said before that doing crafts, like you're an artist, you do art. Doing crafts is the refuge of somebody who's experienced disappointment in other areas of their life. So I went to Michael's, 2 different Michael's. They're open now. You can go in there. They want they've got plexi shields between you and the cashier, like a half-assed bank. They're wearing gloves. Everybody's masked. But I could buy my stupid shit. I was surprised. Carol and I went out to pick up dinner 2 days in a row, and a lot of shit is open. A sports memorabilia store. Most of this little strip mall we went to get half-price sushi was open, and things are. I don't know. Oh, this is what I wanted to say about that. Everybody likes to accuse the other side of being fake news. And a fun thing to do is to tune to CNN, then MSNBC, then Fox, to see how much different what Fox is carrying than what the 2 liberal stations are carrying. But I've been doing that for the last 2 days, and shit is very similar across all 3 networks because there's so much shit happening, and the shit is so immediate and there that it's resistant to too much spin, which I find refreshing, even though it's national misery.
All right. Well, I'm going to respond uh, by getting into my subject, and that is, I assume you got the emails that the transcripts of the Flynn phone call were released, and I sent you the
Yeah, we
emails
argued
of the
about that last
transcript.
week.
Yeah, but now we actually had a chance to read the transcripts of what Flynn really said. So, to recap briefly, the Democrats under Obama, and Obama was the ringleader of it, it turns out, according to Sally Yates, the assistant attorney general. It turns out that they had targeted a one of Trump's advisors to destroy him and put him in prison. And they basically made up charges against him.
Which one are we
And
talking about? Carter Page or Papadopoulos or
and
Flynn?
Flynn, actually, all three of them. It's a good thing you brought up Papadopoulos and Flynn because it turns out that Carter Page and Flynn and Papadopoulos, it turns out that uh, Carter Page was actually working for the CIA, and they accused him of being a Russian spy. And when the Obama FBI called up the CIA and said, "Who is this guy Carter Page?" The CIA said he works for us. And the FBI actually lied. The lawyer, they have his name, and he'll probably end up in jail for this, actually changed his notes in the phone call and said that the CIA knew nothing about him, disowned him, that he was not part of our government, therefore he might have been a spy for the Russians. And they told that to the court so that they could get a warrant to spy on him. And so that lawyer is probably going to go to jail for forging. Carter Page, for 2.5 years, uh, would not say what he was doing. And then finally, when that was released a few months ago with the IG report, he actually admitted on national television, Fox News, because CNN would never cover it, that he was a CIA agent. So the Obama administration was trying to get a CIA agent into prison. They were trying to get Flynn into prison. And their greatest evidence against him was a charge that he lied in an FBI report that the FBI then destroyed. So we don't have that report. They went to court and they basically committed judicial murder on the guy. They basically broke him, got him $8 million in debt. In other words, they didn't. It's one of those things where they don't really have any evidence, but what they can do is just keep attacking him, which is something a big company can do. You know, the government being the biggest. But if you get attacked by, I don't know, Sony, they can just destroy you if you're,
Well, hold on.
you
Let's
know,
talk about that
financially.
because we
So
have.
so
Hold
so
on, hold
that's
on.
what. Wait.
I want to semi-agree with you, just because you and I have each been involved in one lawsuit.
Yeah, I was afraid that this would come up and that you'd divert. Yes,
Yeah,
it's
but no,
true.
no,
When
no.
you
But I'm saying that we've each gone up against a huge company. You went up against
Sony,
MGM,
I was
Sony.
against
I
Sony.
went
Yeah,
up against
ABC.
ABC,
Yeah,
Disney,
yeah.
and in each case, they spent ungodly, to at least us, amounts of money on super expensive lawyers and pretty much crushed us without regard to the actual rule of law.
Exactly. Anyway, so that. Thank you very much for agreeing with me. That's what they did to Flynn. Flynn is
I'm
now
not
eight.
agreeing with you about
Flynn
Flynn, but I am
Flynn
saying that I've
Flynn,
had that
Flynn is now.
experience.
Well, Flynn is now $8 million in debt, and after being abandoned by the Republicans and having the Democrats doing this to him, then they went to him and they said, you know what? We think we've got your son on a technicality too. So he's going to be next. So not only are you going to jail, but we're going to put your son in jail too. Finally, he just said, okay, fine, I'm guilty. I'll agree to whatever you want. Just make the sentence light. Anyway, since that happened, they the intelligence department has released the transcripts of what Flynn did that was considered treason. The Democrats actually considered executing Flynn. He might have been executed for
Who said
treason.
that? Who said that he?
Judge Sullivan suggested that what he did might have been treason in court.
Yeah, but
Sorry.
did the words did Judge Sullivan say we should hang you by the neck until dead?
Rick?
I know that the penalty for
Rick.
treason can be death, but did
Yes,
Judge Sullivan
yes.
say that he should be put to death, or is that hyperbole on your part?
Rick, Judge Sullivan suggested that he might be liable for treason. Yes. And if the penalty for treason is death. Yes.
He didn't say that the penalty for treason is death.
He didn't have to, because most of us aren't such fucking idiots that we already know that.
Yeah, but I mean, there are plenty of people who are found guilty of spying or treason, and who aren't. And I don't. When was the last time we put somebody to death for treason that you know of?
We killed lots of people in the 50s and World War II, and after that, we continued to. Yeah,
we killed the
spies.
Rosenbergs, though. That was in the 50s.
No, but there were people after that, Rick. And Rick, do you realize while you quibble over this, you have no credibility. You're not building an argument. People aren't impressed with what you're saying. I just said that the Democrats had pondered charging Flynn with treason. Now you're quibbling with me, okay? And it's not interesting or important. It's not relevant.
I'm saying that's hyperbole.
No, it isn't hyperbole. When you charge somebody with treason and you are a federal judge like Sullivan, then your life is at stake. That is the penalty for treason. It's either life in prison or execution. So when a federal judge is in court looking at you and saying, we may be considering charging you with treason, that is a very serious thing. So anyway, the point is the transcripts just came out, and you can read the transcripts. I urge anybody to read the transcripts. I just read them tonight, and I sent them to my learned colleague, Rick, and basically he didn't do anything. There's no crime whatsoever. He's talking with Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, and what has happened is the Obama administration has just expelled
Didn't we have this whole conversation last week?
Yeah, but I have now read the transcripts. The transcripts have been released to the public. And the point is that there's no longer any speculation. He was simply asking the ambassador not to overreact. Don't expel everyone from Russia. Once we get in charge, we can try to work out a better agreement about this. That's all he said. And he said, the two of our countries have to work together to destroy ISIS. I mean, in other words, there was nothing illegal about this. The Obama administration were such assholes that they were willing to put this guy in prison for decades just because they were assholes. He hadn't done a thing wrong. And this was just part of a way of getting at Trump and destroying somebody that didn't agree with them. So, that's the side you're on, Rick.
All right, so let me talk about...
Wait. And the last thing is, when I went over this with you a couple of weeks ago, I said, so your side will lie, will frame people, will give false testimony, false evidence, put people in prison for decades for things they didn't do just to get at Trump. And after I said that, you said, wow, well, whatever they've got to do, if it gets Trump, I'm for it. And that's when I called you. That's when I said you were an immoral person. So are you still in agreement that it was the right thing to do if it got Trump?
Okay, so your point of view is that the Obama administration and Obama himself disliked Trump so intensely that they ran roughshod over all kinds of standards, trying to get him. My point of view is that the Obama administration and Obama himself were looking at Trump and seeing such dirtiness and incompetence that they were concerned and wanted to investigate. That they saw all sorts of smoke, questionable ties between Trump people and Russian people, and Flynn's ties with Russians, and also working as a paid lobbyist for a Turkish organization that itself was working for the Turkish dictator Erdogan, and though he was never charged in the Turkish stuff.